Hello, and welcome to the Inside Social Work podcast, where we take a peek behind the scenes into different fields of social work, engage and inspire practitioners, translate research into practice, and encourage lifelong learning. I'm your host, Marie Vakakis. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. Hi, welcome to episode 30. This is incredible. I'm so grateful for all the listeners who've supported me along this journey to make it to 30 episodes. Couldn't have imagined this when I first started. So thank you to everybody, for all the guests, for the listeners, and everybody who's been part of the journey to get the Inside Social Work podcast to 30 episodes. Today's episode, I chat with Blake Johns. Blake is an accredited mental health social worker who works in private practice and in men's behaviour change programs. He shares with listeners some of his journey into social work and some of the challenges working in the men's behaviour change space, as well as some of the outcomes and some of the positive things that he's been able to see. We talk about the importance of compassion as well as self-compassion and the importance of supervision and self-care. And Blake shares some of the ways that he's been able to grow as a social worker and what he wished he learnt when he was first starting. I hope you enjoy my interview with Blake Johns. Hello, welcome to the podcast, Blake Johns. How are you going?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. How are you holding up in the current COVID environment?
Yeah, not too bad. There was a bit of a shaky start at the beginning of it all, but I feel like it's somewhat settled to a certain degree now. But now that school's going back and child protection reports are coming in, kind of bracing ourselves.
And we're kind of chatting before the recording about how difficult it is in this space of we kind of dream that we work ourselves out of a job, and so it's a hard place saying it's really busy, because that means not ideal things are happening out there for us to be that busy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like I mentioned before, a lot of gratitude and things like that for doing such amazing work, supportive work for so many people, and being grateful to be in a job, but at the same time, the reasons why aren't so great. Yeah, that feels tricky.
Absolutely, and gratitude is definitely something that we try and practice a little bit. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and where you're at currently.
Sure. So I'm an accredited mental health social worker. I would describe my practice as male positive, pro-feminist and child-centred and intersectional. I'm doing work in men's behaviour change programs for perpetrators of domestic violence, and I'm also working in private practice. Yeah.
In which state are you in?
I'm in New South Wales. I'm actually on the cusp, New South Wales, Queensland. So down in little Coolangatta. Yeah, so we're right on the border there. But the Men's Behaviour Change Program, that's a New South Wales Department of Justice accredited program. So I work in New South Wales for that job. And the private practice spans across New South Wales and Queensland. So the Tweed, Northern Rivers, and also Gold Coast.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So interesting to see all those different departments work together, but also be so separate. I'm sure there's a whole layer of systemic challenges in that space.
Yeah, definitely. There's working on the border definitely has its quirks, from daylight savings to other cross-border issues, different jurisdictions, and just different support networks. It can be a little bit bumpy sometimes, for sure. Yeah.
Could you share with the listeners a little bit about what are men's behaviour change programs?
Yeah, sure. So men's behaviour change programs are a very specific accredited program in Australia and around the world, particularly Canada, US and the UK, specifically targeting men's use of violence, particularly towards women. There's other sorts of men's behaviour change programs around. that are a little bit different. And without getting into it too much, I guess some of those other behaviour change programs don't quite embody principles of coercive control, triangulation, impacts on women and children. Yeah.
There's so much in that. I'm like, oh, there's so many juicy bits that I could pull out. I imagine it's a very difficult space, and you started off your intro by kind of sharing your personal philosophy and the frameworks you work in.
Yeah.
What are some of the maybe responses or misconceptions about men's behaviour change? So I imagine if you went out for dinner with strangers, you don't just kind of say, hi, I work for men's behaviour change. Like,
yeah.
I remember my placement in child protection was a bit like that, where we never said where we worked. Like we're here from a telecommunications company. Like there are a lot of misconceptions by the public. So without kind of maybe giving too much away, what are some of those things that you think you can understand why the public think that, but it's not really true?
Okay. I guess a lot of the misconceptions, I guess there's always a lot of curiosity, but it's quite emotionally charged, I guess, field of practice where a lot of people have either perceptions or experiences or, I guess, ideas around what domestic violence is, what men's behaviour change is. A lot of people I guess, talk about it as a mental health issue. A lot of people will demonise men. A lot of people will victim blame women and victim survivors. And often children are completely left out of the picture. It's often a really adversarial context, a debate between men and women, between a really binary construct of genders. And it's really political because I guess the work that we do is, I guess, the history of men's behaviour change programs, accredited men's behaviour change programs are gender-based violence, which stems from gender inequality. These days we're a lot more intersectional, but because of that political background and I guess some misunderstandings of what feminism and pro-feminism is, we get a lot of resistance and maybe well-intentional inquiries, but sort of, I guess, missing the mark in terms of understanding power and oppression and violence, especially when people might come from a stance of, not a stance, I guess, everybody's sitting within a culture and a society that's essentially patriarchal, white supremacist, and I guess being indoctrinated within that system and that structure, we're not always supported to hold a line of inquiry that might be a bit more open to what men's behaviour change actually is. Felt like that was long-winded. Did that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there would be so many varying views and perspectives on this. It's just nice to kind of unpack it a little bit more.
Yeah. I think maybe like a firm sort of maybe pragmatic view of men's behaviour change might be really helpful. So our program runs for 36 weeks, broken up into 4 9-week modules. And each of those modules looks at exploring different types of, I guess, violence and men's behaviour change. So, like I mentioned, the program's intersectional and pro-feminist. So what it's really looking at is the different stratifications of power, privilege and disadvantage, how they operate not only in the life of the man, but also that of his family, victim survivors, but also the social and cultural prism which that operates within. So, like I mentioned before, the programs had been historically pro-feminist based, which was based in, I guess, the second wave feminist movement. And that was really, really helpful, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but men's use of violence, violence supporting masculinities, gender inequality, how that influences those causal factors or really strong indicators of men's use in violence is really, really important. I guess the intersectional feminist lens brings more about, well, how does patriarchy also disadvantage men? How does that contribute to men's shame, which sits alongside sexism and misogyny, which also sits alongside racism, heteronormativity, homophobia, and other forms of power over. So now we've kind of got this really nuanced understanding of, or developing a more nuanced understanding of what domestic violence is and what the implications are in men's behaviour change. And I guess that 36-week program with all those different topics can give us a bit of an opportunity to start tucking into that with guys.
That's so interesting. And I'll pop in the show notes later any sort of articles or things that you have in reference to some of those groups.
Mm-hmm.
Being a facilitator, I mean, do you call yourself a facilitator? What's your role?
Yeah, that's good enough.
What are some of the challenges maybe for you personally or working in that system that you face delivering those groups?
Yeah, definitely by far the most difficult for me is balancing a sense of compassion and humanity with accountability and responsibility for the guys. So understanding that these guys are using violence alongside other things like collusion and pressure management in group. And I guess holding a productive space where they can actually, I guess, hold inquiry into the types of violence they're using and where some of those attitudes, beliefs, core values and those behaviours might have came from. There's definitely, I guess, a choice point in whether or not to use abusive behaviours, but abusive behaviours don't happen on their own. And although there's different types and different types of privilege in society, which some people have and some people don't. At the same time, we're all active participants within intersectionality, and we're all affected by different elements of power structures. Yeah.
I think that was so beautifully said around trying to balance those multiple things. And I think a lot of us, especially if you work with maybe mandated clients or you're even doing systemic work, you will come across people who you're trying to balance that compassion and empathy while holding them accountable. Because if you can't show empathy, you can't get change. Their walls up.
100%.
If people feel shamed or blamed, it makes it impossible to get them on side to change that behaviour.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in the Masters of Social Work, we learn a bit about motivational interviewing, which was probably a helpful pathway. That in itself is quite dangerous to use in terms of an anti-collusive perspective, but there's elements of that are probably helpful in explaining a bit more about, I guess, having compassion for some of these guys, working with resistance particularly. That I guess old models of behaviour change that meet resistance with resistance are really not helpful, and actually not only unhelpful to the man but more unsafe for women and children. These days we use, there's a few different approaches. One guy, Alan Jenkins, he's from the Dulwich Centre down in Adelaide, which is where narrative therapy and all that jazz comes from. And he talks about invitational approaches. So invitations for guys taking responsibility. And he's actually not pro-feminist, though he's got what I consider a bit of an intersectional lens. In some ways, it's more about a human rights perspective, I guess. But he talks a lot about colonisation and not to take away from white supremacy and the language around that. We talk sort of colonisation in terms of colonising the guys. And if we're asking men to stop using power over, then who are we to take a higher moral superiority to reproduce those power relations by using power over ourselves? So what we're doing is social justice work. We're not just doing men's behaviour change work, we're doing social justice work. And we're actually demonstrating how that's done through our facilitation.
That sounds like a very difficult kind of balance to get. I'm sure, like, there's so many different things to consider there. What a difficult space to sit in sometimes.
Yeah, it's quite tricky. There's other challenges as well, like I think in terms of intersectional feminism, I'm a white, cis, het, able-bodied dude talking about oppression and privilege with these guys, and I've got a shit ton of privilege. So it kind of feels a bit weird in some ways, talking and advocating on behalf of people that have, I guess, silenced voices. There's a part of me that feels, I guess, privilege is invisible to those who have it. So I've got like a lot of blind spots, obviously. Though at the same time, my woman co-facilitator can put across a certain idea and it will be met with resistance, but I'll wield my power, wield my privilege to put the point across. So there's a need for it. But there's always this sort of like trickiness of like, this doesn't feel right, kind of feels like a necessary use of power. I think we can get caught up in the idea that power is a bad thing, but I think it can be used for good as well. Yeah.
And I imagine that's a difficult line to walk on, whether it's always power or if it's, I see you like me, so maybe you get it. So there's a bit of a camaraderie or kind of perception of camaraderie, maybe.
Yeah.
Which is still part of the privilege, I guess. It's there's a whole lot of other problems with hiring people that look like you and speak like you, and that kind of those subtle ways that kind of permeates through. But I'm sure we could talk about the challenges for
definitely.
In the time that you've been running this, I mean, what are some of the positive outcomes you've seen, whether it's for the men, the children, the families that you work with in this space?
Yeah, talking to positive outcomes is pretty tricky because I really support, I guess, people working with men to shift away from that professional assessment of what's actually going on, particularly when they don't work with the women and victim survivors, not necessarily always women, I should add. I guess I see outcomes in group in terms of their level of understanding increasing of what domestic family violence is. And I think anecdotally, and from hearing from women's and children's advocates, that some types of violence do decrease and the severity might decrease. It's really, really hard to talk to. I guess in a nutshell, what really makes a men's behaviour change program different from anger management and psychology and counselling is that we've got triangulation. So triangulation means that we have the men's presentation group, and then we have family advocate workers that work with partners, ex-partners, victims, survivors. And we also work within an integrated response with police and health, child safety, corrections, and I guess we triangulate the men's presentation. And then even within that, there's all sorts of barriers and obstacles to, I guess, victims and survivors telling us what's going on in the home. So victim blaming is still a thing. socially, culturally, institutionally, structurally, and even with professionals. Like our mental health team is pretty good here, but we've got a lot of individual counsellors and psychologists, for example, that might assess a presentation, a victim survivor's presentation, as a mental health issue. Whereas if we actually peel back the layers, we might actually see it's complex trauma and that they're colluding with the man. So yeah, I guess that one's a little bit tricky to talk to. I see guys' mental health improving, understanding shame, their own shame, their own trauma, understanding gender inequality, its links to gender-based violence. I see them developing a sense of curiosity. I see them in group checking their resistance more, checking their privilege more. But in terms of what actually changes at home, what changes with their behaviours, only victim survivors truly know what's going on there. And sometimes they're able to share their stories, and sometimes they're not liberated or maybe empowered enough to be actually able to share what's going on. Yeah.
It's such a beautiful answer, because I think we do forget that if we're working with just one party, we're taking what they say as the change, and we need to be able to know what's happening on the ground with other people. But even, just some of those things that you mentioned around men understanding their own shame and their own maybe trauma history, awareness of their mental health. There's still good outcomes, even if it's not, even if you're unable to see past that at home.
Yeah, definitely. There's a book that came out recently, a Jess Hill book, and she was talking about one of the main parts of, or contributing factors to men using violence is it's shame-based. So we definitely talk to that, as well as the violence supporting masculinities, which is gender inequality and more pro-feminist based. The sociological sort of side of things is a bit trickier to get hold of, because that's sort of hitting the roots of defensiveness and resistance with some of these guys in a lot of ways. In some ways, not so much. But at least even talking to the shame stuff, it's some of the guys that are a bit more resistive, I guess that's sometimes an entry point for a lot of guys. Yeah.
Do you ever, a part of me is picturing, and maybe this is the early influences on my career choices, you see Hollywood movies or like a little video, and you imagine that you're going to say this one golden nugget piece of advice, and then people will have this revelation, and the whole group will band together. Like, do you ever have sometimes moments where you think, I wish this amazing thing I said would just land that way? But then in other ways, people will come back to you and say, I really thought about that thing you said. And you're like, oh, what thing? And they'll say it to you like, I didn't know what. Okay, that's great. Like, what people take away from some of those moments is very different to the grand moment that you think, yeah, this is the nugget, and if I can just get the light bulb to go off, this is it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, and I think it operates on additional levels in men's behaviour change, because I guess one of the trickiest parts about intake to a men's behaviour change program is this person going to come into the program and try to learn more strategies to use within his entrapment web of coercive control to further abuse another person. And so there's that, what you're saying, and also that whether it's intentionally, and I think there's an element of unconscious in terms of victim stance in self, guys will pick up bits and pieces which is totally totally different to the message that you're trying to get across. So I've had full sessions of talking to male privilege and entitlement. So privilege in terms of what we're born into, and entitlement, what we take from it, and felt like I've had these really healthy, robust, fruitful conversations with guys. And then we hear from partner support that he's gone home and told his, I guess, reverse that onto his partner in some way. It's just, yeah, it's a tricky dilemma. Yeah. Mm.
How do you, I mean, I don't even know how to, where to take that, because it's such a difficult process, and there's so many different things that you're trying to juggle from intake right through the 36-week program.
Mm-hmm.
If we, I mean, if we take it a step back, how do you personally sit with that? Like, what do you need for yourself, whether it's self-care or support, or how do you balance all of those things week after week in an ongoing capacity without burning out?
Mm. Regular supervision's definitely the most important thing. That's, I guess, formal support, I guess you might call it. Having a really robust self-care routine as well. I do a lot of surfing, Vipassana, different bits and pieces, lots of hangouts with friends. I guess a lot of critical reflection on what it is that I'm doing, holding a strong pro-feminist lens balanced with that intersectional, male positive, child-centered stuff. So some of the stuff I might do is, I guess, listening to men talk about abuse and using minimizations, justifications, denial, smoke screens can kind of feel really heavy by the end of the week. So maybe sort of one week it might be reflected on some more of the male positive stuff in terms of there's that old saying, how do you treat others? There are no others. And sort of reflecting on, okay, we're all in this together. It's different for everybody, but we're all marinating in this in this big intersectional prism of, I guess, that shapes who we are as people in a lot of different ways. And then other weeks, I might be feeling my pro-feminist lens might be, I guess, not as close as what it usually is. And that might kind of be because I fall into a man's story of trauma. I work with a lot of guys that have served overseas, sexual abuse history, PTSD. When I said serve overseas, like as veterans. And I guess it's such a difficult balance between that sense of compassion for other and accountability, which is, I guess, compassion for other people, and can't really do that without self-compassion. I guess my weeks are pretty full with prioritizing myself and my relationships. Yeah.
Those few things come up quite a lot for people, and I think for those listening who are new to the field, it's really important. Sometimes, we talk about maybe you can miss one or two supervisions or one or two of your self-care strategies, but long term, you can't do the work you love for as long as you want if you kind of crumble.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of us, like you said, we get into social work to hopefully put ourselves out of a job, and we get out of uni, we hit go and forget that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And self-sustainability and the work's so important. Like you hear of burnt out workers, and it's a real risk. Yeah, I've become close to not burning out, but I've definitely felt I was heading in that direction at one stage. And regular supervision is one of the most important things for me, for sure.
Apart from supervision, and maybe you reflect on this a bit more as you get through your career. What are other things that you found keep you in the job longer? Like you mentioned that you work in private practice as well as for another organization. Like,
yeah,
maybe that's something people overlook. They think the one job has to be full-time for years and years and years in one place, and not realize that maybe sometimes having two part-time jobs or working across different roles or in different capacities, that can also contribute to a reduction in burnout or feeling like you're a bit more you're using different skills or different parts of your brain and different things you enjoy, if that makes sense. I don't know how you see it, but is there anything to share in that space?
Big time, definitely. So I've had a pretty hectic career, I guess you'd call it. It was post-tsunami crisis and community development stuff, then worked in statutory child protection, then went to working on sexual offenders in custody, doing behaviour change, to this job, which has been like a 5-year stretch. And got to a point last year, I'm like, I need a change. I don't know what I'm going to change. And then my boss floated the idea of private practice with me. He's also a mental health social worker. And he's like, why don't you just go get like a different scope and get some diversity? And it's been one of the best things I've ever done. So I'm working with, not that it's any easier, but it's less taxing, just some nice white middle class anxiety. And doing a lot of stuff across juvenile justice, disabilities, some other types of mental health. It's really cool because I'm using, I guess, some of the framework that I developed from men's behaviour change, but I'm also using really different creative types of advocacy and support framework. So I guess this doesn't suit everyone in private practice, far from it. But my private practice, I politicise somatic psychotherapies in working with people. So I do a lot of work in drug and alcohol rehabs particularly, but also some stuff in disabilities where that works really, really well. Particularly like victims and survivors of trauma, where previous models privileged the psychological and biological model of complex trauma, whereas when we're working with people, what we notice is that they talk about the relational challenges and the somatic experiencing of trauma. So it's pretty cool to sort of have like some really great feedback in working with the individual and within systems and with families. And I get quite a few people saying, I've never worked with a psychologist, therapist that works quite this way. It just feels a lot more decentered. It's not about the professional, it's about the individual. And yeah, it's just really refreshing to do something other than, I guess, back ends intervention programs. Yeah.
When you said that about it being more person-centered, it reminded me, there's an episode a few weeks ago, which at the time we're recording this, you wouldn't have listened to, where our guest was talking about working in child protection. And when you work in those spaces, you inherit the public perception of that organization. So, and I feel that can weigh quite heavily on individuals, even if you weren't born when those services started, or you don't agree with some of those original philosophies. You have to you inherit the reputation or the trauma or the influence that mandatory service, for example, has. And I think, and that's just what came to mind when you were talking about therapy work being so person-centered. I found that as well, that it's nice to be in a system where, I'm still constrained by NDIS and Medicare and other stuff, but you can work very much to what the person needs. Do we need more of this work? And you can be quite, it's just you and I in the room. How do we make this work? That's just where my mind went. I don't know how you feel about inheriting that kind of reputation of an organization and then being able to practice on your own, how those two fit.
Yeah. It's I guess I'm really lucky because the Men's Behaviour Change program, the organisation there I work for, is really quite progressive. They're really onto their stuff, and I'm still learning tremendous amounts from those guys. I guess I hear people's experiences of working in an organisation and there's constraints and things like that. I feel like my approach to the work has really been supported organisationally. I guess my private practice has sort of just extended into some things that I'm really interested in, like the somatic work and reading up on the power threat meaning framework. It's like an alternative to the DSM that's non-pathologizing. So it's been cool. It's the person-centered stuff is it's definitely a part of my work. I forget where I was going with that.
That's okay. I do that all the time.
Yeah.
So I'll get you to, the book, the Jess Hill book you mentioned, and a few other things. We'll pop links to those
Cool.
in the show notes.
Yeah.
If anyone listening out there wants to get into this space and working with family violence or men's behaviour change, what are some things that you might, what's some advice you might give them about maybe where to start or what kind of training to do or jobs to look for?
Well, I'm actually finishing up work in a few weeks. I'm going to be driving around Australia in my van, so I'm going to have a lot of time. So if anyone wants to swing me a message through my website, Blake Johns Counselling, they're more than welcome to do so. Otherwise, I definitely suggest looking at resources like NROS, other peak bodies for men's behaviour change like No to Violence. There's some great books like Jess Hill, which is great from a gender-based and psychology sense, but isn't intersectional. In terms of getting into jobs, I guess it depends where they're at in their career. It's definitely harder for guys getting into a domestic violence setting because a lot of the work leading up to it is, I guess, those type of roles are preference to different genders. I guess it's a tricky question. It depends where you're at in your career, but definitely if you haven't got any experience, starting with support worker positions, getting into a bit of mental health and seeing how you can get more involved in domestic violence settings. Or if you can't get into domestic violence, how can you start to adopt domestic violence understandings of coercive control, intersectional feminism, into your current work?
That's great, and I'll put a link to your website and those other resources in the show notes. Just kind of parting, I guess we're at the end of our time together. A parting question before I pick your brain about where you're traveling in your van. What's one of the things that you wish you knew when you first became a social worker?
The importance of self-care straight away. I remember doing these critical self-reflections in the masters and just kind of breezing through them, like, I just surf every day sort of thing. Or like if things get too much, I just buzz off and go away in the van for the weekend. And I'd really, really recommend sitting down and having a good think of what fills your cup, what stops you from filling your cup, where's the tap at, all that sort of stuff. I guess I've found the importance of self-care the hard way, particularly with difficult jobs. But I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to really relate to your self-care ideas, strategy, plan, really feel into it, know contingencies, know who's around you.
I can definitely empathize with that. I think my problem earlier on was saying yes to too many things and then feeling swamped and overwhelmed. And maybe social workers aren't the best at asking other people for help or support. So just feeling like I've got to contain this because I said yes and I can't let anybody down.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's really hard. Well,
Yeah.
it's been so lovely chatting with you, and I'm sure people can reach out to you on your website, and we can put a link to any of your other kind of contact details in the show notes.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks for being a
Thanks very
guest.
much. Yeah, thanks so much for chatting. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for today's episode's resources, and don't forget to click subscribe and review us wherever it is you get your podcast.